Mom, you're useless. Stop begging. The words landed harder than the winter wind blowing through the cracked kitchen window. She froze in her chair, a fork suspended halfway to her mouth. Her eldest son didn't even look at her when he said it, just kept scrolling on his phone, his voice casual, dismissive, like he was shooing away a stray cat. It was Christmas Eve. The table should have been warm with laughter, clinking glasses, the smell of roasted turkey filling every corner. Instead, the room felt colder than the snowstorm rattling against the shutters. Her chair, once the head of the table, had been pushed to the far corner, near the draft. Her daughter-in-law shot her a glance, sharp and impatient. She's always asking for things. We have enough bills to cover without extra mouths. The pause before extra mouths cut deeper than any knife. No one defended her. Not one of her 3 children spoke up. They kept eating, passing dishes, talking about their mortgages, their promotions, their upcoming vacations. She sat in silence, the fork heavy in her hand. The humiliation was complete in its simplicity. No shouting, no scene. Just a quiet exclusion, like she didn't exist. She looked down at her plate. 2 small slices of turkey, some mashed potatoes, leftovers scraped from the bottom of the serving tray. She remembered when she used to serve the feast herself, piling food high, making sure her children had the best portions. She used to stay up all night cooking, humming carols under her breath, proud to give them joy. Now they treated her like a beggar at her own table. Her youngest son leaned back in his chair, sipping wine. Mom, maybe it's time you think about moving out. A smaller place, or, somewhere more appropriate. His voice carried a smirk. Everyone at the table understood what he meant. A nursing home. Out of sight, out of mind. Her chest tightened, but she didn't argue. She had learned long ago that her silence made them reveal more than her words ever could. From the corner of the room, the Christmas tree blinked with soft, colorful lights. Ornaments she had collected over decades hung there, each one tied to a memory of sacrifice, of love, of years when she gave everything she had. None of her children noticed. They were too busy arguing over who would inherit the house after she was gone. Her hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from holding back. She placed her fork down, folded her napkin, and let her eyes rest on each of them in turn. They didn't see it. They saw only an aging woman, small, worn, dependent. What they didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that she was far from poor. And tonight, as they laughed without her, the seed of justice began to take root. The morning after Christmas was quieter than ever. The house smelled faintly of stale wine and burnt candles, but no one lingered in the kitchen. Her children had gone back to their lives, leaving dirty dishes stacked high, gift boxes half opened, and the faint echo of laughter that hadn't included her. She sat at the kitchen table alone, clutching a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee. The same chair where, just hours earlier, she had been told she didn't belong. The silence pressed down like a heavy blanket, reminding her of what had been said, word for word. Her eldest son's voice still rang in her ears, "You're useless." The words had replayed in her head all night, louder than the wind outside, sharper than the cold creeping through the thin walls. She tried to go about her morning routine, sweeping the floor, rinsing cups, straightening chairs, but each movement felt hollow. Every task reminded her she was living in a house that no longer felt like home. At lunch, she opened the refrigerator. There was plenty of food, but nothing was set aside for her. Plastic containers labeled with her children's names lined the shelves. Turkey sandwiches wrapped neatly, pasta with sticky notes claiming ownership. She reached for a slice of bread and felt a pang, not for the food, but for what it symbolized. Even here, she was an afterthought. Later that afternoon, she stepped outside. Snow covered the yard, a clean white sheet over the place she once tended with care. She remembered planting roses along the fence, watching her children play tag under the summer sun. Now the roses were gone, cut down, the yard bare. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and sat on the front steps. Neighbors passed by, some waved politely, but most hurried on, busy with their own holidays. She could feel the isolation gnawing at her chest, deeper than the cold air could reach. Inside, the voices of her children returned. Not in person, but in memory. The arguments about money, the dismissive laughs, the whispered plans about nursing homes. Each recollection stacked on the last, brick by brick, until the wall between her and them felt unbreakable. Dinner time came, and she found herself reheating a small bowl of soup alone. The family table sat empty, chairs pushed back, crumbs scattered across the wood. She ate quietly, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall. Once, this house had been filled with warmth. Now, it was only walls and echoes. She carried her bowl to the sink and rinsed it slowly, staring out the window at the falling snow. For a moment, she let her hand rest on the counter, steadying herself. She wasn't weak, but she was tired of being invisible in the very home she built. And in that tiredness, a deeper silence took root. The kind of silence that waits. The kind of silence that remembers. That night, after the dishes were washed and the lights dimmed, she slipped quietly into her bedroom. To anyone else, it was just a modest room, faded curtains, an old dresser, a worn quilt folded neatly at the edge of the bed. Nothing about it suggested wealth or power. And that was exactly how she intended it. She opened the bottom drawer of the dresser and slid aside a pile of old sweaters. Beneath them lay a slim black folder. Her fingers lingered on it for a moment before she pulled it out and placed it on the bed. Inside were papers, contracts, deeds, certificates. Each page carried the weight of decades, a lifetime of small but clever decisions. The stock certificates from companies she had invested in long before they became household names. The property deeds for houses and land quietly purchased, rented, sold, and bought again. Bank statements with numbers that would make her children's jaws drop. $40 million. She had never spoken the number aloud. Even now, the sound of it in her mind felt unreal. But the truth was there in black and white. Her children thought she was weak, dependent, barely surviving. They saw only the thin coat, the simple meals, the way she lived quietly. They never asked how she managed the bills after their father passed. They never wondered how she kept the house mortgage-free, how the lights never went out, how she always had a little extra to cover their college tuition when they came begging years ago. They never asked, because they assumed. And she never corrected them. She leaned back against the headboard, the folder open across her lap. For years, she had told herself it was better this way. If they thought she was poor, they would show their true colors. If they loved her, it would be for her, not for what she owned. But the cruelty of the last few days had proven the truth she feared most. Without the money, she was nothing to them. She closed the folder and slid it back under the sweaters. Then she reached higher into the dresser and pulled out a small box. Inside was an old photograph, her in her 20s, standing beside her late husband in front of their first small shop. The sign above them read Family Market. That little store had been the start of it all. They worked, they saved, they invested carefully. And when he died, she carried it forward alone. Her children never knew the details. They never cared to. She placed the photograph back in the box, her lips pressed into a thin line. They thought they were pushing her into a corner. They thought her silence was surrender. But silence can be sharper than any blade. She turned off the lamp, her face calm, her eyes steady in the dark. For now, the secret would stay hidden. But not forever. The days after Christmas brought no kindness. If anything, the chill inside the house deepened. Her eldest son arrived one evening with a stack of papers tucked under his arm. He didn't knock, he never did anymore. He dropped the folder on the kitchen table with a heavy thud. "Mom, it's time to be realistic," he said. "This house is too much for you. We've already spoken to a realtor. If you sign here, we can get it on the market before spring. Prices are high right now, we'd be stupid to wait." She looked at the papers. Bold letters at the top read Agreement of Sale. Her name, typed neatly in black ink, stood out like a brand. Her voice was calm. "And where would I live?" His shrug was careless. "We'll figure something out. Maybe a small condo. Or, assisted living. They take good care of people there." The words hung in the air. Assisted living. He said it like a solution, not a banishment. Before she could respond, her daughter swept in, tossing her purse on the counter. "He's right, Mom. You can't keep pretending you can manage all this. We have our own families to care for. You can't expect us to babysit you forever." Her daughter-in-law added from the doorway, her voice dripping with disdain, selling the house is the responsible thing. Besides, it's not like you paid for it recently. You've just been living here. The jab stung, but she kept her expression steady. She folded her hands in her lap, the picture of frailty. Silence was her shield, and right now it was stronger than any argument. Her youngest son leaned against the fridge, arms crossed. Look, Mom, no one's trying to be cruel. But you don't contribute. You don't work. It's not fair for us to carry everything while you just sit here. Not contribute. The phrase cut deep. They had no memory of the years she worked double shifts, the nights she went without sleep so they could have new shoes, tuition, medical care. In their minds, those sacrifices had vanished the moment she stopped being useful to them. She stared at the papers again. She didn't reach for the pen. She didn't argue. She simply said, "I'll think about it." Her children exchanged glances, satisfied they had made progress. They left the papers on the table, confident she'd signed them out of fear or exhaustion. That night, after they were gone, she sat at the same table for hours. The agreement of sale lay there like a dare. The lamplight flickered across the bold black letters. She traced her name with one fingertip, not in agreement but in defiance. They thought her silence meant surrender. But in truth, it was patience. Every cruel word, every dismissal, every attempt to erase her, she collected them quietly, storing them like kindling. One day, soon, she would strike the match. For now, she let the papers sit untouched. And the house, her house, remained hers. It happened on a gray January morning. The snow outside had turned to slush, dripping steadily from the gutters. She sat in the living room, knitting quietly, when the door burst open. Her daughter stormed in, her heels clicking across the hardwood. Behind her came the eldest son, his jaw tight, and the youngest carrying another stack of papers. They didn't even say hello. "Mom, this has gone on long enough," the eldest said, tossing the folder onto the coffee table. "The realtor has buyers lined up. All we need is your signature." She didn't move. The needles in her lap clicked once, then stilled. Her daughter's voice rose, sharp with impatience. "We're not asking anymore. You can't take care of yourself. You can't pay the bills. You're just wasting space. We're making the decision for you." The youngest added, almost smug, "We even visited a nursing facility yesterday. It's nice, clean, safe. You'll be better off there." Her hands trembled, but not from fear. She set the knitting aside, her eyes steady on the papers. "Is this really what you think of me?" she asked quietly. Her daughter crossed her arms. "It's not about what we think. It's about reality. You're old, Mom. You don't belong here anymore. Sign the papers." The room went silent except for the dripping gutters outside. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to meet their eyes, not as the frail woman they dismissed, but as the mother who had built everything they now stood on. Her eldest sighed, exasperated. "Mom, stop dragging this out. You have no choice." That was the moment. The moment when the dam inside her cracked. She leaned forward, her voice calm but carrying weight. "You think I have no choice. You think I have nothing. But you're wrong." They blinked at her, surprised by the steel in her tone. She reached for the folder, flipped it open, and scanned the pages with deliberate slowness. Then she pushed it back across the table. "No," she said simply. Her daughter snapped, "What do you mean, no?" "I mean," she replied, her eyes cold as the slush outside, "I'm not signing away what's mine. Not today. Not ever." The three of them exchanged looks, confusion, frustration, disbelief. They weren't used to her refusing. For years she had been quiet, compliant, bending to their demands. But not now. She stood, her back straighter than it had been in months. "If you want me gone, you'll have to fight harder than this. And when the truth comes out, you'll regret every word you've spoken to me." Her eldest laughed nervously, brushing it off. "Truth? What truth? You have nothing." Her silence in reply was louder than any shout. Because what they didn't know, what they had never cared to ask, was that she held more than they could ever imagine. And soon, they would learn. The showdown came sooner than they expected. A week after that January morning, she asked her children to meet her at her lawyer's office. They thought they had won. They walked in confident, whispering among themselves about how much the house would sell for, about how quickly they could split the money. None of them noticed the calm set of her shoulders, or the way her hands no longer trembled. The office was sleek, lined with oak shelves and polished brass lamps. At the center sat her lawyer, a man who had known her for decades. He rose when she entered, greeting her with a respect her children hadn't shown in years. "Mrs. Lane," he said warmly, "everything is prepared." Her eldest frowned. "Prepared for what?" "We're here to finalize the sale." The lawyer adjusted his glasses, opening a thick file. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." Her daughter scoffed. "Misunderstanding? Mom doesn't even pay the utility bills. She can't keep this place. We're selling." The lawyer looked at her, then back at the children. His tone sharpened. "Your mother not only owns this property free and clear, but she is also the primary holder of substantial assets. Assets that have been carefully managed for decades." The room went silent. Her youngest leaned forward, his voice cracking. "What assets?" The lawyer slid several documents across the table. Stock portfolios, property deeds, trust statements. Numbers so large they almost looked unreal. "Your mother's net worth is currently $40 million, the lawyer said evenly. Her children stared as if the air had been sucked from the room. Their mother sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't gloat, didn't smile. She let the weight of the truth do the work. Her daughter's voice finally broke the silence, shrill and desperate. "This has to be a mistake. She has nothing. She dresses like a beggar." The lawyer's gaze was cold. "Appearances can be deceiving. What matters are the records, and these are indisputable." Her eldest slammed his palm on the table. "Why didn't you tell us?" For the first time, she spoke, her voice steady and sharp. "Because I wanted to know who you really were. And now I do." The words cut deeper than any paper on the table. The lawyer cleared his throat and continued. "As of last week, your mother has updated her will and established a trust. Effective immediately, the three of you are removed as beneficiaries. Her estate will pass to individuals she deems worthy of her legacy." Their faces drained of color. "You can't do that," her daughter shouted. She leaned forward, her eyes like steel. "Watch me." The eldest tried to argue, but the lawyer raised a hand. "It's done. The documents are signed, notarized, and filed. Contesting them would be costly and futile." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. She stood, slow and deliberate. "You treated me like a beggar. You wanted me out of my home. You saw me as nothing. But I was never powerless. And now, you'll have nothing from me." Her words echoed in the oak-paneled room like a verdict. Her children looked at her then not as a burden, not as a weak old woman, but as someone they had underestimated too long. And for the first time in years, she walked out of the room not behind them, not beneath them, but ahead, taller, stronger, untouchable. The days that followed felt different. The air inside her home was lighter, the silence no longer heavy with loneliness but filled with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. Her children stopped coming around. No more unannounced visits, no more folders shoved across her table, no more whispers about nursing homes. Their absence was almost a relief. For the first time in a long while, she could walk through her house without feeling like a trespasser in her own life. She moved slowly from room to room, running her fingers across the furniture, the walls, the photographs. Each picture told a story: the birthdays she planned, the graduations she paid for, the Christmas mornings she filled with gifts. Her sacrifices were everywhere, carved into the wood of this house. She had given her children everything, and when they thought she had nothing left, they tried to strip even her dignity away. But now, the truth stood taller than their greed. Her lawyer stopped by one evening to finalize the trust. "It's all settled," he told her. "Your estate is secure, and it will go exactly where you want it to." She nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "Not to those who turned their backs on me." Instead, she directed her fortune to causes and people who mattered, a scholarship fund in her husband's name, a donation to the local hospital, and most of all, a trust for her granddaughter, the only one who had ever shown her kindness without expecting anything in return. On Sunday, she invited that granddaughter over for dinner. The two of them sat at the same table that had once been filled with tension, but now it was just laughter, the smell of roast chicken, and the warmth of genuine love. Her granddaughter looked at her with wide eyes. "Grandma, why didn't you tell them sooner?" She stirred her tea slowly, considering her words. "Because sometimes, child, the only way to see someone's heart is to give them nothing to gain. And now we know their hearts." The younger girl nodded, thoughtful, as the candlelight flickered between them. That night, when she lay down to sleep, she felt no bitterness, only clarity. Her children had chosen greed over love, cruelty over care. And for that, they had lost the one thing money could never buy back, a place in her heart. Her story wasn't one of wealth. It was about truth, and how silence can be a weapon sharper than any sword. Betrayal cuts deep. But justice, when it finally arrives, cuts deeper. And as she drifted to sleep, she knew the lesson would outlive her. Family is not measured by blood, but by loyalty, respect, and love. February brought colder winds, but the chill in her family's hearts cut sharper than the weather. They had not spoken to her since the meeting at the lawyer's office, but that silence didn't last. One evening, her eldest son appeared again, this time angrier, more desperate. He didn't bother knocking. He stormed into the living room with the arrogance of a man who still believed he was in control. "Mom," he snapped, "you've embarrassed us. Do you understand what you did? We looked like fools in front of that lawyer. Do you think this is funny?" She sat in her armchair, knitting quietly. The fireplace glowed faintly, throwing long shadows across the walls. She didn't look up, didn't flinch. Her daughter barged in behind him, her voice rising like glass shattering. "You can't just cut us off. We're your children. We deserve what you have. After all we've done for you." Her laugh was bitter, humorless, and sharp. "Done for me? You mean the insults? The papers you shoved under my nose? The home you tried to take away?" Her daughter-in-law stepped forward, her eyes narrow with contempt. "You wouldn't even have this house if it weren't for us keeping the lights on. Don't act like you're better than us." That was the cruelest part, the lies layered on top of betrayal. They erased her sacrifices, rewrote history in their favor. But she didn't argue. She let the words wash over her like icy rain. Her youngest son, quieter but no less greedy, finally spoke. "Fine, Mom. If you won't cooperate, we'll find another way. Don't think you can just sit here with your fortune and leave us with nothing." The threat hung in the air. They didn't know she had already locked everything away in trusts, legal and untouchable. But the venom in their voices told her this wasn't over. She folded her knitting carefully and set it aside. "You've made yourselves clear," she said softly. "Now get out of my house." They blinked, startled. It was the first time she had spoken those words to them. Her daughter's face twisted in outrage. "How dare you? After all we've..." "Get out." Her voice was calm, cold, final. They left in a storm of slammed doors and muttered curses, but their anger was laced with something else, fear. For the first time, they realized they couldn't bend her so easily. Later that night, she stood at the window, watching the snow swirl under the street lamps. The house was quiet again, but her heart was steady. Every cruel word, every demand, every threat, it only strengthened her resolve. Her silence was no longer the silence of submission. It was the silence of preparation. And though her children didn't know it yet, their greed had written the ending to their own story. Not everyone turned their back on her. A few days after the stormy confrontation, she received a call. The voice on the other end was gentle, familiar. "Mrs. Lane, it's David. I thought we should meet. There are developments you'll want to know about." David was her longtime lawyer, a man who had guided her through every investment, every trust, every decision since her husband passed. Where her children saw weakness, David had always seen discipline and foresight. They agreed to meet at a small cafe on the corner of Main Street, the kind of place where no one asked questions and the coffee tasted the same year after year. She arrived bundled in her wool coat, her steps measured but steady. David stood as she entered, pulling out a chair for her with quiet respect. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I've tightened everything. The trusts are sealed. Your assets are untouchable. Whatever threats your children make, they can't touch a cent." Relief flickered across her face, though she kept her composure. "I knew I could rely on you." He hesitated, then leaned in. "But there's something else. Your granddaughter, Emily, reached out to me. She's worried about you." Her heart softened at the name. Emily, the only one who still visited without asking for anything. A college student with little to give but her time and her affection. "She told me," David continued, "that she overheard some of the conversations. Your daughter and sons are planning to push harder. They might try to forge your signature or manipulate the courts." Her jaw tightened. The cruelty of her children no longer surprised her, but the thought of them dragging her name through lies and fraud still pierced deep. "Emily doesn't want you to face this alone," David added. "And neither do I." For the first time in months, warmth crept into her chest. She wasn't entirely alone. She sipped her coffee slowly, then nodded. "Tell Emily I'd like to see her. And tell her. She's the only one who's shown me true family." David smiled faintly. "She already knows." As they parted ways, she felt the weight on her shoulders shift, just slightly. The cruelty of her children was still there, pressing hard, but now she had allies, steady, loyal, and sharp. Her children thought she had no one left in her corner. But in truth, the strongest pieces were already moving quietly into place. The following week, she found herself once again in David's office. This time, she didn't shuffle in like a frail old woman. She walked slowly but upright, her eyes sharp, her silence deliberate. David spread a series of documents across the mahogany desk. "These are the final revisions," he explained. "The trusts are airtight. The assets are legally shielded. If anyone tries to contest, it will collapse before it even reaches a judge." She picked up a pen, holding it carefully between her fingers. The golden nib reflected the light, a small glint of power in her hand. She signed each page with steady strokes, her name written in bold loops, as though reclaiming it from the dust of her children's insults. When the last page was done, she set the pen down with a quiet finality. David nodded. "It's done. They'll never see this coming." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Good. Let them keep underestimating me. It makes the ending all the sweeter." That evening, Emily came by. She carried a bag of groceries, placing them gently on the counter before giving her grandmother a warm hug. "Grandma," she whispered, "I don't care what Mom says. You're not a burden. You never were." The older woman's eyes softened. She didn't cry, but she rested her hand on Emily's cheek. "You're the only one who sees me for who I am, not for what I can give." Emily hesitated, then asked, "Are you planning something?" Her grandmother didn't answer directly. Instead, she opened a drawer and pulled out an old leather-bound notebook. Inside were decades of notes, dates, receipts, accounts, investments, all meticulously recorded. She let Emily glance at the pages before closing it again. "Sometimes," she said, her voice low, "silence is not surrender. It's strategy." Emily didn't press. She simply nodded, understanding more than her grandmother needed to say. Later, as the house grew quiet, the old woman sat by the window, the lamplight pooling across her lap. Outside, snowflakes drifted down, soft and unassuming. But beneath that calm lay weight, purpose, inevitability. Her children thought she was powerless, but each signature, each document, each step with David and Emily was another stone in the foundation of their downfall. They still laughed behind her back, calling her weak, useless, disposable. Let them laugh. Because when the truth surfaced, it would silence them more completely than any words ever could. It happened at her grandson's birthday party. The living room was crowded with balloons, chatter, and the sugary smell of cake. Children ran across the floor with paper hats, laughter bouncing off the walls. To an outsider, it looked like a perfect family celebration. She stood quietly near the corner, her hands folded in front of her. She had dressed in her best sweater, a simple blue knit that had kept her warm for years. It wasn't flashy, but it was neat. She thought, at the very least, she might blend into the cheer around her. But her daughter spotted her almost immediately. "Mom," she said loudly, her voice carrying across the room, "why are you wearing that old thing? Couldn't you at least try to look presentable for once?" Several guests turned their heads. A few exchanged awkward glances. Her cheeks burned, but she stayed silent. Her eldest son chimed in, laughing as though it were a joke. "Careful, she might ask for donations. Better lock up your wallets, everyone." The laughter that followed was thin, nervous. But it was enough. The humiliation spread through her like wildfire, searing her dignity. She stepped back toward the wall, hoping to disappear into the shadows. But the words kept coming. "She doesn't contribute anything," her daughter-in-law said, her tone sharp as glass. "Just sits around, expecting us to feed her. Honestly, sometimes I wonder why she's even here." The room fell silent. Even the children paused, sensing the tension. Her grandson looked at her with wide eyes, unsure of why the adults were suddenly so cruel. She forced a smile, but it wavered. She could feel every gaze on her, some pitying, some uncomfortable, none coming to her defense. And then her youngest son delivered the final blow. "She has nothing," he said flatly, raising his glass as if to toast. "She's nobody." The words struck like a hammer. In that instant, the years of sacrifice, the nights spent working double shifts, the tuition payments, the meals skipped so her children could eat, all of it was erased by 4 syllables, "She's nobody." Her hands tightened around the hem of her sweater, but she didn't argue. She didn't shout or plead. She simply lowered her eyes and let the silence speak. Because what none of them knew, what none of them could even imagine, was that the woman they had just mocked in front of friends and strangers held more power than all of them combined. She let the moment burn into her memory, every insult carved deep. Not as pain, but as fuel. When the candles were blown out and the guests filed home, she remained calm, her face unreadable. Inside, though, the decision was made. This was the last time they would ever humiliate her in public. The next time they gathered, it would be on her terms. And the world would finally see who she really was. That night, when the laughter and the clatter of dishes had faded, she sat alone in her bedroom. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. It carried the hollow silence of words that could never be taken back. On the nightstand lay a small stack of papers, pamphlets from the nursing home her children had been pushing. She hadn't asked for them, they had left them there, a silent declaration of her supposed fate. She picked one up, running her fingers across the glossy cover. Smiling seniors in stage gardens, bingo nights, sterile hallways disguised with flowers. The image was cheerful, but to her it felt like exile. Her hands trembled slightly. Not with fear, but with the weight of betrayal pressing down on her chest. These were her children. She had held them when they were infants, worked her fingers raw to clothe them, sacrificed everything to see them grow. And now, they wanted her tucked away, forgotten, stripped of the home she built. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, snow drifted gently under the lamplight, covering the street in white. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, her reflection faint against the night. The woman staring back at her looked older, yes, but not broken. Still, the ache in her chest was real. For a moment, she let the sadness wash over her. The loneliness. The humiliation. The sense of being erased by the very people she had lived for. She sank into her chair, the nursing home pamphlet still in her lap. If she had been the woman they believed her to be, weak, powerless, defeated, perhaps this would have been the end of her story. Perhaps she would have signed the papers, given in, disappeared quietly. But she was not that woman. The silence stretched, deep and heavy, until it turned into something else. Resolve. Her eyes sharpened as she set the pamphlet aside. They thought they had buried her under their cruelty. What they didn't understand was that she was still standing, and beneath her calm exterior, she was already writing the final chapter of their downfall. Tonight, she allowed herself to feel the weight of despair one last time. Tomorrow, she would begin to turn it into power. The next morning, the house was silent again. The humiliation of the party still lingered in the air, but her spirit had shifted. She moved with a quiet certainty, as though she had finally reached the end of her grieving. She went to her bedroom and closed the door. From the bottom drawer of her dresser, beneath neatly folded sweaters, she pulled out a small brass key. She had kept it hidden for decades, worn smooth from the times she had turned it over in her hand but never used it. Today, she slid it into the lock of the heavy wooden trunk that sat at the foot of her bed. The lid creaked open, revealing folders stacked with meticulous care. Each one bore neat handwriting across the labels: property deeds, investment portfolios, bank certificates, trust agreements. Years of quiet labor, wise decisions, and sacrifices compressed into paper. She lifted the first folder: property deeds. Land she had bought when no one believed in her judgment. A small cabin near the lake, now worth 10 times its original price. An apartment building purchased when others called her foolish, now fully rented with steady income. She traced the embossed seals with her fingertips, remembering every choice, every risk she had taken alone. The next folder revealed stock certificates. Names that had once meant little, tech companies that rose to dominate the market, pharmaceutical firms that boomed after years of research. Her modest investments had multiplied beyond imagination. And then the bank certificates, accounts spread across institutions, balances so large they seemed unreal even to her. $40 million. She whispered the number softly to herself, as though to confirm it was real. It wasn't pride in the money itself, it was validation. Proof that her silence had never been weakness, that her sacrifices had built something unshakable. At the bottom of the trunk lay an envelope, heavier than the rest. Inside was the updated trust, sealed and notarized. With it, her future, and the fate of her children, was secured. She sat on the edge of the bed, the documents spread around her like armor. The insults from the party replayed in her mind: she has nothing. She's nobody. But the papers told another story. She gathered them carefully, placing them back into the folders. Her hands no longer shook. She locked the trunk again, sliding the key into her pocket. Her children believed they had stripped her of dignity, that she was one step away from surrender. They were wrong. Every insult, every slight, had only sharpened her resolve. And now, with the hidden deeds secured, she was ready to let silence transform into strategy. When the time came, she would not raise her voice. The papers would speak for her. In the weeks that followed, she moved with the patience of someone playing a long game. Outwardly, she remained the same, an aging woman in simple clothes, shuffling through her house, making tea in the quiet evenings. To her children, nothing had changed. They still saw weakness. But behind closed doors, everything was shifting. She met with David twice a week, sometimes at his office, sometimes in quiet corners of that old cafe where the staff knew her order by heart. Each meeting was another brick in the wall she was building around her fortune. Together, they reviewed the trusts line by line. Every clause was airtight. The house was transferred into an irrevocable trust in her name, beyond the reach of greedy hands. The investments were consolidated and protected. And, most importantly, her children's names were stripped from every document. "You're sure about this?" David asked one afternoon, his voice cautious. She looked at him evenly. "They left me no choice. They saw me as less than nothing. Let them see what that costs." The pen in her hand moved slowly but firmly, signing papers that would decide the future. Each stroke was quiet, almost unremarkable, but with every signature, she felt herself reclaiming years of dignity. Emily often joined her after these meetings, carrying bags of groceries or simply sitting with her over cups of cocoa. Sometimes the young woman asked questions about the past, how her grandmother had built her investments, why she never told anyone. Other times, she simply listened. "Grandma," Emily said softly one evening, "I don't understand how they can treat you like that. But I'm proud of you. For everything." Her grandmother smiled faintly. "Pride is nice, child. But justice, that's what we're aiming for." At night, the house felt different. She no longer wandered through it as a ghost in her own home. She walked with a purpose, knowing every photograph on the wall, every floorboard under her feet, belonged to her, not because of luck, but because of a lifetime of sacrifice and discipline. Her children still called occasionally, their voices laced with frustration and demands. "When are you going to sign the papers, Mom?" "We can't wait forever," her eldest snapped one night over the phone. She simply replied, "Patience, dear. All in good time." He mistook her calm for surrender. He had no idea what was coming. The stage was being set. Every insult, every cruel word, every dismissal, they were all part of the ledger now. And soon, she would balance it. Not with shouting. Not with vengeance in the way they expected. But with silence, strategy, and the crushing weight of truth. By March, her children had grown restless. Their calls turned from sharp demands to outright threats. When those failed, they decided to confront her in person. It was a Saturday afternoon when they arrived together, their voices already raised before the door even opened. She was in the kitchen, pouring tea, when the pounding began. "Mom! Open up!" her eldest shouted. "We're not leaving until this is settled." She opened the door calmly, stepping aside as they stormed in. Their energy was frantic, almost feverish. They carried folders, pens, and that same realtor's paperwork she had already refused. Her daughter slammed the papers onto the table. "Enough games. You're going to sign this today." Her eldest leaned across the table, pointing at the signature line. "We've been patient. We've given you time. But you're dragging this out for no reason. You're not thinking straight. This house is too much for you." Her youngest crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "If you don't sign, we'll take this to court. Don't think we won't." She moved slowly, taking her seat at the head of the table, the place they had pushed her away from at Christmas. Her hands wrapped around her teacup, the steam rising between them like a barrier. Her voice was quiet. "You want me to sign away my home?" Her daughter rolled her eyes. "It's not just your home, Mom. It's our inheritance. Don't be selfish." That word, selfish, hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, the only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. She placed her cup down carefully. "And if I refuse?" Her eldest smirked, mistaking her calm for weakness. "Then we'll force it. The courts don't care about stubborn old women. They'll see reason." Her eyes lifted, steady, unblinking. "Very well. Let's meet with the lawyer. One last time." The three of them exchanged triumphant glances. They believed victory was in reach. They thought her silence was surrender, that her compliance meant defeat. But what they didn't see, what they never had the patience to notice, was the quiet strength hardening behind her eyes. She gathered the papers, stacked them neatly, and pushed them back across the table. "Bring them to David's office," she said simply. "We'll settle this properly." Her children left the house convinced they had won. Their voices trailed down the driveway, boasting about the money, the freedom, the future they thought was finally theirs. She remained seated at the table, her tea cooling beside her. Her expression never changed. Because she knew. The moment they walked into that office would be the moment everything turned against them. And this time, the silence would break, like a verdict delivered in stone. The conference room smelled faintly of leather and polished wood. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long beams across the mahogany table. She sat at one end, calm and composed, her wool coat draped neatly across the back of her chair. Her children stormed in together, papers in hand, voices raised before they even sat down. "David," her eldest began, slapping the realtor's forms on the table, "Mom has been stalling long enough. We're ready to finalize the sale today. We just need her signature, and we're done." David, the lawyer, didn't flinch. He glanced at the papers, then folded his hands. "That won't be necessary." Her daughter bristled. "What do you mean, not necessary? She can't keep this house. She can't even afford to maintain it." Her youngest leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Be reasonable, David. You've seen her. She has nothing." The older woman finally raised her gaze, her voice quiet but cutting. "Nothing." Her eldest waved a dismissive hand. "Don't play games, Mom. You've lived off us for years. You've drained us. It's time to end this charade." David cleared his throat. His tone shifted, sharp as a gavel. "Actually, it's time you ended your delusions. Your mother is not dependent on you. In fact, she owns this house outright, and much, much more." The room went silent. Her children exchanged confused glances. Her daughter forced a laugh. "What are you talking about? She's broke. She dresses like a beggar." David opened a folder and spread documents across the table. Property deeds. Investment portfolios. Bank statements with balances that silenced every smirk. Your mother's net worth, he said evenly, is over $40 million. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Her eldest's face went pale. 40. What? Her daughter shook her head violently. No. That's impossible. She never had money. We would have known. David's expression hardened. No. You never cared enough to ask. While you mocked her, while you pressured her, she was quietly building and protecting everything she earned. And now, she has chosen what to do with it. Her youngest slammed his hand on the table. This is ridiculous. She can't just cut us out. For the first time, she leaned forward, her eyes like steel. I can. And I have. David nodded. The trusts have been updated. The will has been rewritten. Effective immediately, the three of you are removed as beneficiaries. Your mother's estate will go to those who have shown her love and respect, not cruelty. The silence that followed was heavier than any insult she had endured. Her children sat frozen, their mouths opening and closing without words. For years, they had seen her as powerless, voiceless, disposable. And now, in a single stroke, she had turned the world upside down. She rose slowly, pushing back her chair. You called me nothing, she said quietly, each word like a blade. Now you will get nothing. And with that, she walked out of the room, her footsteps steady, leaving her children to drown in the weight of their own greed. News travels quickly in small towns. Within a week of the meeting, whispers spread, the frail woman her children had mocked wasn't destitute after all. She was wealthy, richer than most could imagine. But the truth wasn't the only thing that spread. Consequences did too. At the lawyer's direction, letters were sent to each of her children, formally notifying them of their removal from her estate. The words were brief, professional, final. No loopholes, no negotiations, no appeals. Her eldest son received his letter at work. He read it twice, his hands trembling, then shoved it into a drawer, hoping no one would see. But his colleagues noticed his pale face, the way his swagger seemed to collapse in on itself. Her daughter received hers at home. She tore the envelope open with manic energy, her eyes darting across the lines. When the meaning sank in, she crumpled the letter and screamed into the empty room. The youngest, perhaps the most arrogant of all, called his mother immediately. Mom, this has to be a mistake. You wouldn't actually. She cut him off, her tone calm and razor sharp. It's no mistake. You called me nothing. Now I return the favor. Click. The line went dead. But her revenge wasn't only in the paperwork. It was in the way she lived afterward. She invited Emily to move in for a while, transforming the atmosphere of the house. The kitchen filled again with warmth, laughter, and the smell of fresh bread. Neighbors stopped by with congratulations, admiration flickering in their eyes. For years, they had seen her shuffle quietly, overlooked by her own children. Now, they looked at her with respect. She didn't flaunt her wealth. That was never her style. Instead, she directed her resources quietly but decisively. A scholarship fund for young single mothers. A generous donation to the local library. Renovations to the community center that had once hosted her children's birthday parties. Each action was a reminder, her legacy would outlast their greed. Her children tried to fight back, of course. They shouted, threatened, even hinted at lawsuits. But David was always one step ahead. Every attempt collapsed under the weight of her airtight trusts. Judges dismissed filings before they reached the floor. Their outrage only highlighted their impotence. And then came the humiliation they couldn't escape, everyone knew. At church, neighbors whispered. At the grocery store, heads turned. Those are the kids who tried to steal from their own mother, people said behind cupped hands. The shame clung to them heavier than chains. Meanwhile, she walked down Main Street with Emily by her side, her head held high, her steps steady. Not as a woman beaten down, but as someone who had endured, waited, and triumphed. Her revenge wasn't cruel. It wasn't violent. It was simple, elegant, absolute. They had taken her love for granted, mocked her silence, and dismissed her worth. And now, because of that, they had lost everything. At night, as she sat by the fire, she let the crackling flames remind her of all she had endured. Her children's insults no longer pierced her. They had no power left. The ledger was balanced. And justice had spoken louder than any of their cruelty ever could. The fallout was swift, merciless, and impossible to contain. Her children, once so certain of their entitlement, suddenly found themselves at the center of whispers wherever they went. At the grocery store, clerks exchanged knowing glances. At church, pews shifted uncomfortably when they walked in. Neighbors who had once smiled politely now turned away. Everyone knew the story. They tried to force their mother out of her own home. They called her worthless. And all along, she was worth millions. The shame was heavier than any punishment a court could deliver. Her eldest son, proud and arrogant, felt it the most. His business associates, once eager to dine with him, now avoided his calls. Deals slipped away. A contractor who had relied on his reputation found doors slamming shut instead. If you can't respect your own mother, one colleague told him bluntly, why would anyone trust you with theirs? Her daughter, who thrived on social gatherings, found her invitations drying up. She was no longer welcome at the charity luncheons she had once dominated. Whispers followed her like shadows. That's the woman who mocked her mother in front of guests. The memory of that birthday party, her sneer, her insults, had spread far beyond those walls. The youngest, cocky and careless, tried to shrug it off. But even he could not escape the weight of disgrace. His friends teased him at first, then drifted away, not wanting to be associated with someone who had tried, and failed, to swindle his own mother. Even the bartender at his favorite pub slid his drink across the counter with a muttered, "Shame on you." The humiliation was inescapable. Meanwhile, she walked through town with her head high. Not because she flaunted her wealth, but because the truth had been revealed. She was no longer invisible, no longer dismissed. People greeted her warmly, offering respect she hadn't asked for but had earned 100 times over. Emily walked beside her, proud and protective. When neighbors whispered, they whispered admiration now. That woman is strong. She taught her children a lesson they'll never forget. And perhaps the most satisfying justice of all was this: the children's punishment came not from her hand, but from the weight of their own actions. They had written their downfall with every cruel word, every selfish demand, every public humiliation they had inflicted. Now the community had delivered the verdict. Her children had lost the one thing money could never buy back: respect. She never raised her voice, never slammed a door, never sought vengeance in anger. She simply revealed the truth. And the truth did the rest. Justice didn't need to shout. It only needed to be seen. And everyone had seen it. Spring came, melting the last of the snow and washing the town in green. For the first time in years, her home felt alive again. Sunlight poured through the windows, warming the wood floors where grandchildren once played. This time, it wasn't the whole brood, it was Emily, her arms full of textbooks and fresh groceries, her laughter filling the empty spaces that betrayal had carved. The house was no longer a place of conflict but of comfort. They cooked together, ate side by side at the same table that had once echoed with insults. The meals were simple: roast chicken, fresh bread, warm tea, but they carried more love than any lavish feast her children had ever thrown. In the evenings, she would sit in her favorite chair by the fire while Emily studied nearby. The glow of the lamp softened the lines on her face, and for once, she felt seen. Not for her money, not for what she could provide, but simply for who she was: a mother, a grandmother, a woman who had endured and survived. Neighbors dropped by with small gifts: a pie, a basket of flowers, a note of thanks for the donations she had quietly made to the community. She accepted them with humility, never boasting about what she had, only grateful that her story had turned from whispers of pity to words of respect. The silence in the house was no longer heavy. It was peaceful now, broken by the sound of Emily humming while she worked, or the quiet crackle of the fire. One evening, Emily looked up from her books. "Grandma, do you regret it? Keeping it all a secret?" She thought for a long moment before answering. "No," she said softly. "Because if I hadn't, I would never have seen their true selves. Better to know the truth, even if it hurts, than to live a lie." Emily reached across the table, squeezing her hand. And in that simple gesture, she felt the bond of family, not the kind written in blood alone, but the kind written in loyalty, kindness, and love. Her story was no longer about betrayal. It was about survival, and the quiet victory of choosing who deserved to stand at her side. And as spring unfolded outside her window, she knew she had finally found peace. In the end, the story wasn't about money at all. Yes, she had $40 million. Yes, she had hidden it, guarded it, and revealed it only when the time was right. But what lingered, what burned deepest, was not the size of her fortune, it was the truth revealed in the hearts of her children. They had seen her as weak, as useless, as someone who could be discarded like an old coat. They had mistaken silence for surrender, patience for helplessness. And in doing so, they lost everything that mattered. Their inheritance vanished. Their reputation crumbled. Their community turned its back. But the greatest loss of all was something no paper could restore, the bond of trust between a mother and her children. Once broken, it could never be bought back. She had endured humiliation, loneliness, and betrayal. But she never sought revenge in anger. She sought justice in truth. And when the truth surfaced, it spoke louder than any shouting match, louder than any courtroom battle. Justice didn't arrive with fury. It arrived with documents, with signatures, with the steady hand of a woman who refused to be erased. And perhaps that is the lesson. Betrayal cuts deep. It can hollow out the heart, leave scars invisible to the eye. But silence, when chosen, when tempered with wisdom, can be the sharpest weapon of all. It waits. It gathers. And when it finally speaks, it speaks with finality. She proved that wealth is not measured in dollars alone. True wealth is measured in dignity, in resilience, in the courage to walk away from those who would tear you down and to stand with those who lift you up. Her children had blood ties, but no loyalty. Emily, her granddaughter, had loyalty without demand. In the end, love, not inheritance, decided who was family. So let this be remembered. A house can be sold, money can be spent, fortunes can rise and fall. But respect, once lost, can never be bought back. And justice, quiet, patient, inevitable, always finds its way. If this story spoke to you, if it stirred your heart, remember to carry its lesson forward. Family is not defined by who shares your name, but by who shares your respect. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, tales of betrayal, silence, and justice served, make sure to like, subscribe, and return tomorrow. Because tomorrow, another story waits.